Hello, welcome to Red Rock Canyon State Park. My name is Lou Figueroa. I'm a state park volunteer. And this morning what I'd like to talk to you about is a little bit about the climate and what we have found throughout the numerous years that Red Rock has been around. Basically, the landmass itself was created over 8 million years ago by Mother Nature and herself. But as time progresses, the land starts changing, environments change, and it's a continuous thing. Over 8 million years ago, we've had beautiful, beautiful land masses out here where most of our vegetation that you see today weren't actually here. We had more like savanna land, very tall grasses. We had a lot of waters, a lot of ponds, lakes, and rivers were dotting all over this landscape here. Over the years, we've also had volcanic activities that were laying ashes upon ashes on top of one layer after another layer there. But the animals that we had here were really fantastic. First of all, we got to think of, we look now, we see a desert. During that time frame, though, we had animals here that we actually associate with Africa in itself. We've had rhinoceroses. Fossil bones have been found out in these general areas here. We even had 5 different species of camels, ranging from the small heights all the way to the very grandeur, tall type. It's a giraffe-like camel. So camels were out here, various different sizes in itself. We also had elephants that were out here. They called them gomphotheres. And these elephants had 4 tusks, 2 on the top and 2 on the bottom, which really made it unique. We have pictures, renditions, and all inside the visitor center that later on you'll be able to see in itself. So as the years went by, climate started changing. The evolution of volcanoes and all started covering different ash layers here, destroying some of the vegetation. Climates are changing and changing and changing. By 12,000 years from this date here, the climate started drying up and it's becoming more and more drier. Certain periods after a couple of thousand years, we would have some pluvial periods, which means we had a lot of water, rains and all, but then it started dissipating again. And the climate started drying out again and again. And then again, for maybe about 1,000 years, we'd have more rains again. But as each time got closer to our present time period, it got drier and drier. And what we see today is an actual different type of situation here. It's all desert in itself. But the plants are very, very hardy to be able to survive out here where the temperatures can get into well above 100-degree mark. And during the winter, the plants itself survive where it gets down below freezing levels. So the desert in itself, even though it is sparse and some of our terrain look more like badlands, there's a lot of life out here in the desert. And later on, what we want to do is welcome you to our visitor center where you can see the subjects that I was talking about, such as the ash layering, the geology, the paleontology of the fossil animals that were found here. You'll actually be able to see them. The latest fossils that were found, not the latest, but let's say they found mammoth and bison. Bison over 10,500 years. So they were still roaming out here at that time period. But again, as you see, climates change, vegetations change, and many animals become extinct. This is just part of Mother Nature's way of doing things. But let's see what happens and what you can actually see of the actual human history, paleontological, and some of the geological history of Red Rock Canyon as we transition over to the visitor center.
Hello everybody, I'm Ranger Damian Laughlin. I'm a peace officer and ranger here at Red Rock Canyon State Park, and I want to welcome you to the Ricardo Visitor Center. I'm going to give you a little tour of the visitor center so that you can see it. Maybe one day you'll come in person and get to see this stuff for yourselves. So the first thing I'm going to point out is a neat thing we have here in the visitor center. It's a hide of a black bear. Black bear is not a animal that we typically see in the park, but this poor guy wandered down from the Sierra Nevada mountains and was hit by a car on Highway 14 and was killed. So we were able to retrieve it, and some park staff were able to treat it properly and get it in here as an exhibit. It's a nice little hands-on exhibit for some of our visitors that come in. So moving along over here, we're going to talk about the geology of Red Rock Canyon State Park. It's one of the main reasons people come out here. It's a geologic wonderland. So Red Rock Canyon was formed as we see it today millions and millions of years ago. And this used to be a kind of a low area, and the climate was much different. It wasn't a desert. There were lots of wet periods. And the wind, water, rain, everything would wash down all this debris from the Sierra Nevada mountains and build up layers and layers over millions of years. And those layers would get compacted down into sandstones, mudstones. It was also a very volcanic active area, and we'd have lots of lava flows of different types. And you can see some of the more common rocks that we have here. Over here on the left, we have this basalt, and this was a common igneous rock found in the area. And it's an important rock in Red Rock Canyon State Park because it's a very erosion resistant rock. And it makes a lot of these layers that we see here possible. Otherwise, these softer sandstone layers would wash away. And speaking of sandstone, that's the next rock we have down here. And a lot of our sandstone make up the red layers that you see because some of those layers have a lot of iron in the sandstone, and that iron, as it's exposed to wind and rain, will rust and oxidize, and it turns that bright red color. Here we have another volcanic type rock. This is tough breccia or breccia, depending on who's saying it. It's more of like a frothy, foamy lava flow. So this one flows and it scoops up lots of little rocks that you can see in there. And we have a lot of volcanic ash layers in Red Rock Canyon State Park. And the ash layers are very cool because it helps them date exactly how old the layers are, because they can trace the volcanic ash layers back to specific volcanic eruptions. And as a matter of fact, we have ash layers here that have been linked back to super eruptions back in Yellowstone millions of years ago. And here we have some more basalt. And then finally down here we have a rock that was important to the Native Americans around here is chert. That's a really nice rock to make tools and projectile points and cutting tools and things like that. So lots of really cool geologic rocks here. And the reason Red Rock Canyon has the cliffs it has today, because after all those layers were deposited, then the tectonic activity started, and we had earthquakes and faults, and those layers got lifted up and then eroded down, and that's why we see all the layers we see today. All right, so now we're going to move on to the fossil history of Red Rock Canyon State Park. This is one of the big draws for a lot of scientists, paleontologists in the area, and we have a lot of layers that are very rich in fossils out here, from old, millions of years old large mammals all the way down to more recent and ice age times, smaller mammals and animals and plants for that matter. And so here we have on display some of our older ones. We have some mammals that are no longer alive today. These are extinct ones, but here we have a fossil that came from a camel. Yes, we had camels in California. They actually evolved from here and then went to other continents, and now they're no longer here. But this was a giraffe-like camel. It evolved to have, long legs, long backbones, and long necks, so they could, reach the food that was harder to reach otherwise. And one of the other really neat animals that we had out here is the gomphotheer, which you can see some pictures of what it may have looked like. And this right here is one of its tusks. This thing had 4 tusks, and that fossil there will kind of give you an idea of the size. And this fossil is believed to be about 10 million years old. So that's one of our older extinct animals here as well. And then as we come over here, we have some more fossils that are from that era, probably around 7 million to 12 million years old. We have we had a lot of herbivores, carnivores, cats, There you see a little display of what it might have looked like while they were digging up fossils. It's a very slow, tedious, special process. And up over here we have some skulls of some different cats and dogs that used to be in the area. This was from a large dog. I believe that we didn't have bears back then, and so dogs kind of played that role in the food chain there. And they call this one kind of a bear dog. It kind of assumed the role of a bear during those times, all the way down to little fox-like dogs there. As we move over here, you can see again one of these is a camel bone here. That's this one here, and then we also had some extinct horses. We have a three-toed horse right here, which is another old extinct animal that we had here. And then we also have some teeth from those horses. And we have a lot of fossil things that are actual prints left behind. There's fossilized camel footprints in some of our layers. That's one of the more common things that can be found in the, I don't want to say common, but they're found in the park. And you can see the size of some of these animals just based off of the size of the bones here. You can see these are leg bones, probably from those camels as well. And then as we get later on into history, or towards more recent times, we had some ice age times that came through here, and probably remember saber-toothed cats. And we had tiny animals, large animals. We had bison and mammoths and things like that roaming around. And that was more than 10,000 years ago, 10 to 20,000 years ago. We were coming out of one of our most recent ice ages. And again, this place wasn't a desert during that time, and it was a wetland, and there were a lot of large mammals roaming around. But as the climate dramatically changed into a desert climate, those animals really started to die off. And here we have some microfossils, and these are tiny little fossils from shrews and mice and things like that. And here, this one's neat because on the tip of this pin is a tooth. And that's a rendering of what the tooth looks like, but it's so tiny it's on the tip of that pin in there. And so they'd actually find microfossils like that around the area as well. And in this little view right here, you actually have a mammoth tooth. So just my hand in there for size, you can see how giant just a tooth from the mammoth were. And of course, those are also now extinct. But fossil history is rich here in Red Rock Canyon State Park. Okay, so Native American history is another important aspect of Red Rock Canyon State Park. We have a very rich Native American history here, going back probably more than 10,000 years. There's a tribe called the Kawaiisu tribe. They called themselves the Nua, but they're commonly known as the Kawaiisu around here. And they inhabited this area for thousands of years before European settlers came in. And they would use this area seasonally, sometimes year-round. They'd also go up into the mountains, Tehachapi Mountains, as a wintering home up in Tomokani State Park and some of that area as well. And down here you can see some of the artifacts that have been gathered from in and around the park. You'll see different items used as tools. You can see some of the chert there, which is it's similar to obsidian. It's a very good tool that flakes easily, and to make sharp cutting tools and projectile points, you'll actually see some obsidian here. Some of that might have been found fairly locally or traded for. They would commonly trade with other neighboring tribes. Like you'll see over here, some beads that were made from shells. So those were probably traded with a coastal tribe, maybe the Chumash or something out by the coast. And you'll see some other tools they would use to grind seeds and other nuts and things like that down into flours and pastes for some food items. And then up here, you've got a model of a Native American from the Kawaiisu tribe, Andy Green. He modeled for this, and there are still some remaining Kawaiisu members up in Tehachapi in the surrounding area, and they're still speaking and learning the original native language today. So it's nice for that tradition to carry on. But you know, as I said, it's one of the main draws to this park is also its amazing Native American history. So as we move more towards modern times with European settlers coming in, there's a whole different history that happened in Red Rock Canyon State Park. There's a mining history. There's a lot of old mine claims, mine shafts, and lots of old settlements and foundations and things that remain from that area. And some you'll see here, these are dry washers. This was an actual one, and that's an artist rendition of one. This kind of the tools that they would use, this was probably more recent in the 1900s, but in the late 1800s, they were mining for gold in Red Rock Canyon State Park, and they found a decent amount of it, but there wasn't a lot of water, so they had to come up with different unique methods like dry washing to filter the gold out, you know, since there wasn't a lot of water available. So, and then other people would come in the later 1900s with better equipment, and they would actually go through the material that the 1800s people were throwing aside and pull the gold out that they missed. So it was kind of two little mini gold rushes in there. As time went on, we had some early settlers come through here, and one of the most common known is going to be Rudolph Hagen. He came in and established this area as a little town site, which is named Ricardo. It's actually named after his son, Ricardo or Richard, depending on what it went by. So that's why we call this the Ricardo Visitor Center. You can see some photos of the old town site, a little general store. He had his Ricardo Land and Water Company. I think that's one of the ways he hoped to establish this place. And eventually, he sold the place, and we passed legislation in, I believe, 1968 to make this place a state park. And then it greatly expanded in the early 90s as we acquired another 20,000 acres. So it makes up the 27,000 acres of the park that you see today. And one last thing that's worth mentioning in Red Rock Canyon State Park, because it is a huge draw in the springtime, especially after some decent rain, is the wildflowers. This is a very spectacular place to come see wildflowers, and we have some endemic species, which means they're only found here in Red Rock Canyon State Park as well. So anybody who loves to come see wildflowers, come here in March, April, after a good season, and you'll see a really great display. All right, here we are in front of Hagen Canyon. This is one of the natural preserves in the park, and behind me you can see some of the most scenic layers and cliffs that we have in the whole park. And just like we talked about in the visitor center, you can see all these layers here. These were built up over millions and millions of years. These older layers down at the bottom are the oldest layers, and then each layer was built upon on top of it. And you had all this water and sand, and all this would come down and wash all these layers down, and they'd build up over years and years. And some of the layers had a lot of iron deposits in them, and those are the red layers that you see that over the years have been exposed to wind and rain, and they've oxidized and turned those deep red colors. And then one of the most important layers you see here is the basalt layer at the top, that dark brown layer, and you can see a lot of it is sort of sloughing off over the years. That forms it's a very hard, erosive resistant layer, and it's one of the reasons we have these scenic cliffs around Red Rock Canyon State Park, because that forms sort of a protective layer so that these layers underneath are sort of protected a little bit from erosion so that they can be exposed for us to see here. And you're looking at millions of years of history, geologic history, that's been uplifted and protected for us to see here today. And here behind me we have a formation known as Turk's Turban. It's one of the more popular and probably most photographed features in the park. It's one of the things that you can't help but see as you drive in on Abbott Drive off of Highway 14. It's a really cool formation, and you can see it just kind of broke off and settled in an upright position from the formation behind it. And one thing that I like to point out about Turk's Turban is you can see the big red band in Turk's Turban, and the band it used to be associated and connected to, and you can see how the layers that have been exposed to years of wind and rain over time have oxidized, while the area behind it is still sort of gray. It hasn't had that time to turn that deep red color yet like the outer layers have. We don't know exactly when that broke off. We do know that there's pictures of it around the turn from the 18th, 19th century of it in this position. So we know it's been at least that old, but it's been there for quite some time, and it is definitely one of the scenic areas here in Hagen Canyon.
We're now located in a famous area of Red Rock Canyon that is actually called Red Cliffs. And as we look at Red Cliffs in itself, you can see its immense beauty, cathedral-like towers that we see all along as a backdrop out here. The colors are so vibrant, they come out red. You can actually see the oxidation coming so red. And then the white striations, the stratigraphy of the white ash layers that were formed through the volcanic activities. This area here, as you look, you can actually see right below here to the right, you'll see a line coming down. That's a fault line that comes through on the rock area in itself. If we pan a little bit more to the left, as we look over here, you can see the rocks that are split up on top. Eventually, those are going to come down through the actions of wind and rain and the erosion. So this could be a very dangerous area for folks. If we look down below, we can see people out there taking pictures and all amongst the boulders that have come down from this beautiful scenic area that we've got. Remember, beauty, but also it could be very dangerous in itself. This portion of the canyon was used a lot during the early parts of the movie histories from the 1920s on to about the 1950s. Many Westerns were shot out here. Red Rock Canyon was basically second to Alabama Hills, which are located up north, up by the Lone Pine area. But if you look at a lot of the Westerns in itself, you'll see many times this section of Red Cliffs was utilized for either wagons being run through here or actually horses running for long distances. The magic of the movies, the way they put their cinematography and put their different projectors in different angles will make a horse that was actually only running less than a quarter of a mile look like it was running almost a mile or more because of the way they did that. It's just amazing. So next time you see an old Western from the 50s, the 40s or so, keep in mind of this backdrop here. And believe me, when you see it, you'll relate it to Red Rock Canyon State Park. Okay, well, I'm glad that you folks were able to see the tour both outside, talking about the landscape and all, and the fossil animals that were found out here, and then being able to put it all together by coming in here and seeing all the different artifacts that we've got to share with you so you can understand the history of what occurred actually here in the Red Rock Canyon. But one important thing is that Red Rock Canyon in itself is constantly evolving. We know what happened in the past. We know what's happening right now in the present with everything that's going on, but we don't know what's happening in the future. And it's folks like you who take an interest in this park here to help keep it alive and vibrant and safe for everyone to be able to use. We hope that you enjoyed our trip today throughout this beautiful park here in California, which is Red Rock Canyon State Park. And with that,
I would just want to thank you guys for joining us on this virtual tour, and I can't wait for all of you or any of you to come out and see this park and welcome you to this park. It is open now, but I can't wait till we get this visitor center back open and you can come and see all this for yourselves. Remember, these parks belong to you, so come enjoy your state parks.